I'm 38, married for almost 5 years to a man I thought I knew inside and out. We met later in life, both divorced, both with teenage kids. It felt like a second chance at something good, stable, calm, safe. I brought my daughter, Ellie, into the marriage. He brought his son, Kyle, who was 14 when we got married. Now he's 18, about to leave for college. Our blended family wasn't perfect, but we made it work. Kyle was quiet, maybe a little moody, but never disrespectful. He and Ellie got along like typical step-siblings, not close, but civil. My husband, Tom, was the glue. Funny, calm, always the peacemaker. He worked in IT, loved his gadgets, always had some new toy drones, security cams, smart thermostats. Ellie used to joke that if she sneezed in the basement, Alexa would file a noise complaint. Last month, Kyle came home from school early, stormed into the kitchen with his face pale and angry. He barely looked at me. I thought maybe he'd had a fight with a friend or gotten bad news from a college. Instead, he pulled out a small black object from his backpack, a mini spy camera. He dropped it on the table and just said, "This was in my room." He didn't say anything else, just left the house and drove to his mom's. At first, I thought it had to be some mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe it was part of the home security system Tom had been tweaking lately. He was always moving cameras around. But why would one be in Kyle's room? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but that night when Tom came home, I asked him about it. His face changed instantly. Not shocked, not confused, just blank. Like he'd been preparing for this moment. He said Kyle was probably mistaken. That maybe it fell off a shelf or was from an old setup. But his explanation was shaky, vague. He kept fumbling for words. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. And what I didn't know then was that this tiny camera would unravel every single thing I thought was real about our marriage. The next morning, I waited until Tom left for work. I knew his computer password. After all, he'd set up the devices in our home, including my own laptop. I told myself I had every right to look. This was about our son's privacy. About safety. Tom kept everything organized, labeled by date, by camera, by room. It was too methodical. Too intentional. There were folders named after each room in the house. Living room. Kitchen. Garage. Guest room. Kyle's room. My stomach dropped. I opened Kyle's folder first. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the mouse. Inside were hundreds of files, short video clips. Some only a few seconds long. Some several minutes. They were dated as far back as 8 months ago. I clicked one at random. It showed Kyle sitting at his desk, doing homework. Another had him sleeping. One showed him getting changed. I slammed the laptop shut so fast I nearly cracked the screen. I couldn't breathe. I kept telling myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe Tom was worried about Kyle sneaking out. Maybe it was for security. Maybe it was temporary, and he just forgot to remove the footage. But deep down, I knew. There was no reason to record Kyle like this. Not in his bedroom. Not in secret. Not for 8 months. And that was when I realized, this wasn't just about Kyle. I reopened the laptop. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I clicked on the folder labeled guest room. That room had been empty for almost a year, except for when my younger sister came to visit last summer. And that's when things went from horrifying to unthinkable. My sister stayed with us for 3 weeks last July. She'd just gone through a breakup and needed a place to breathe. I remember how Tom offered to set up the guest room with new sheets, a fan, even blackout curtains. I thought it was sweet at the time, thought he was just being helpful. But now I understood why he was so eager. When I opened the guest room folder, I froze. There were fewer videos than in Kyle's folder, but the timestamps lined up exactly with the dates my sister had been here. The clips were longer, too. Some of them over an hour. I hesitated. I didn't want to see what was inside, but I had to know. The first clip opened with my sister unpacking a suitcase. Normal stuff. Until she started changing. She had no idea she was being recorded. The angle was from the vent above the closet. It had a perfect view of the bed, the dresser, the mirror. My entire body went numb. I clicked out, clicked another file, then another. All of them were the same, footage of her living her private life. Dressing, sleeping, sometimes just reading in bed. No audio, just video. I didn't see anything sexual, but it didn't matter. It was a violation. And now, 2 people I loved, my stepson and my sister, had been filmed in private spaces by my husband. I shut the laptop and stood there for what felt like an hour, just staring at the wall. My skin crawled. My house felt contaminated, like everything I trusted had been rotted from the inside out. Then I had another thought. Ellie. I ran to her room, opened the closet, checked every corner, every vent, and that's when I saw it. Tucked in the top corner, inside what looked like an air freshener, was a tiny blinking light. There was a camera in my daughter's room too. I backed out of Ellie's room like I was walking on broken glass. My chest felt tight. My vision was blurry. I couldn't breathe. She's only 15. 15. And Tom, my husband, had hidden a camera in her room. God knows how long it had been there. I wanted to scream, but Ellie was still asleep down the hall. I couldn't let her wake up and see me like that. Not yet. Not until I figured out what to do. I stumbled into the kitchen and sat at the table, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. My whole world had tilted sideways in the last 12 hours. Every minute felt like another crack in a dam that was about to burst. I knew I had to call the police. I also knew what that meant. Our lives would never be the same. The investigation. The headlines. The questions from family. The trauma Kyle and Ellie would carry forever. The way people would look at them. At me, for not seeing the signs. For marrying a man who did this. For letting him into our lives. But if I did nothing? If I stayed quiet? I was protecting a monster. No. I wasn't going to be complicit. I took one last look at the laptop, still sitting on the couch where I dropped it. Then I opened a new email, wrote everything I'd found, attached screenshots of the file folders, and sent it to myself. After that, I grabbed the external hard drive from the drawer and started copying every folder. It was almost 6:30 a.m. when Tom came home. He wasn't supposed to be back until noon. I heard the garage door open and froze. He was early. Too early. And he walked into the house like nothing had happened. Like everything was normal. I forced my expression into something neutral, though I could feel the tremble in my jaw. I had to keep it together. Just until Ellie left for school. Just until I could get her out of the house safely. Tom looked surprised to see me awake, sipping cold coffee at the kitchen table. He smiled like he always did. Kissed my forehead. Asked if I couldn't sleep. I wanted to vomit. I nodded, mumbling something about early emails for work. He didn't press. Just went to the fridge like it was any other morning. Every move he made felt calculated. Mechanical. Like he was performing for an audience he thought was still asleep. I studied his face. There wasn't even a flicker of guilt. Just calm, practiced ease. Ellie came in a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes and whining about cereal. Tom ruffled her hair, called her kiddo, made a joke about her bedhead. I wanted to scream at him to never touch her again. But I couldn't. Not yet. I helped her pack her lunch, and the moment the school bus came into view, I practically shoved her out the door with a kiss and a have a good day. I waited at the window, making sure she got on safely. When the bus turned the corner, I turned around to face him. He was sitting at the table, sipping coffee. Like he knew something was off. Like he'd been waiting for me to say it. So I did. I asked him straight out if he had something to tell me about the cameras in the house. For 1 second, just one, something flashed across his face. Not fear. Not shock. Irritation. Like I'd just ruined his morning. Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, he said I was being ridiculous. That the cameras were for home security. That Kyle was paranoid and probably found an old backup unit. That the footage was just data from old system tests. I asked him why there were labeled folders. Why there was footage from the guest room. From Ellie's room. His face went flat. Blank. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up. Walked over to the laptop. Reached for it. I stepped in front of him, hand on the lid. And I told him, very quietly, that the files had already been copied. Backed up. And sent to someone outside the house. That's when everything changed. The moment I said those words, "It's already been backed up," his entire body changed. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just stopped. Like his mind was spinning faster than his face could keep up. He stood there, silent, for what felt like forever. Then slowly sat back down, eyes locked on mine. I think he was trying to figure out how much I really knew. How much I'd seen. Whether I'd gone to the police. Whether there was still a chance to spin it. And in that quiet moment, that stillness, I realized something. He hadn't planned for this. He never thought I'd look. He never thought Kyle would find anything. He thought he was too smart. Too careful. Too trusted. His arrogance had made him sloppy. He leaned forward, elbows on the table like he was about to give me marriage advice. He said that I was misunderstanding everything, that context matters, that I was letting emotions cloud my judgment. Then came the soft threats, wrapped in sweetness. That exposing him would ruin everything. That Ellie would be dragged into this. That Kyle would be humiliated. That our family would be torn apart forever. That we'd be those people in the news. That it wasn't too late to fix it quietly. I asked him, again, why there was a camera in my daughter's room. He said nothing. Just stared at me. I could see the calculation in his eyes. The slow understanding that he couldn't charm his way out. Not this time. I told him I needed space. That I'd be taking Ellie to my sister's for a few days. That he wasn't to come near us. That the footage was in a safe place. He didn't argue. Didn't say a word. He just nodded, stood up, and went to the basement. Like it was a normal day. I left within the hour. Ellie was confused, but I didn't tell her anything except that we were going on a little trip. She didn't ask many questions. I think she could tell from my tone that something was off. When we got to my sister's, I pulled her aside and told her everything. She didn't even let me finish before picking up the phone. The police were on our doorstep within 2 hours. I thought I'd feel relief once I told the police everything. I thought reporting it would feel like some sort of justice. But it didn't. It felt cold. Heavy. Like handing over the last pieces of your life and waiting to see how many come back broken. The detective who showed up was calm, serious, and deliberate. He didn't say much at first, just asked to see the external drive, the emails, the camera I found in Ellie's room. I handed them over without hesitation. They didn't ask a million questions like I expected. They just nodded, took everything, and said they'd be in touch. It felt too quiet for something so huge. But I realized later that silence was intentional. The next morning, I got a text from my neighbor. Police cars. 2 of them. Parked outside our house. And a third? Unmarked. They'd gone in with a warrant. They seized all of Tom's devices. His desktop, 2 laptops, an old tablet, even the drone equipment in the garage. They combed through everything, top to bottom. Every flash drive, every SD card. They even pried open a smart thermostat he installed in the hallway. I didn't go back there. I couldn't. Just the thought of walking through that house made my skin crawl. Instead, I stayed with my sister, clutching my phone like it was the only thing keeping me upright. That afternoon, the detective called. He said they had enough to press charges, multiple counts of unlawful surveillance, possession of illicit footage, and suspected intent to distribute. But it was what he didn't say that chilled me. He paused before telling me this part. Said they found other folders. Ones I hadn't seen. Including some labeled with dates before I even met Tom. This wasn't new. This wasn't recent. This was who he had always been. I stared at the phone long after the detective hung up, fingers numb, mind spiraling. Before I met him. That phrase kept echoing in my head. How many people had he done this to? How many rooms, how many hidden cameras? How long had this all been going on, before me, before Kyle, before Ellie ever entered his life? And what kind of man builds a marriage, a family, while hiding this sickness behind a smile? I asked the detective if he could tell me more, but he said the details were sealed under investigation. What he could say was that some footage dated back over 10 years. There were women. Young women. Some of them clearly staying in short-term rentals, guest rooms, Airbnbs, maybe even hotels. They were working with other jurisdictions now. It was bigger than I imagined. That night, I sat down with Ellie. I didn't tell her everything. Just enough. That we were going to stay with Aunt Marcy for a while. That her stepdad had done something very wrong. That it wasn't her fault. That she was safe. She didn't cry. She just asked if she ever had to go back. I told her no. Not ever. The next day, Kyle called me. He hadn't been back to the house either. He was still staying with his mom. He didn't say much, just that he was sorry. That he didn't know how to process it. That the camera in his room wasn't even the worst part. Because he had noticed things over the years. Like how Tom never knocked. How he always wanted to help fix Ellie's electronics. How he always seemed to know when someone was home, even when the security alarm wasn't set. But Kyle thought he was just being paranoid. He wasn't. He'd been right all along. I hung up and cried harder than I have in years. Not just because of Tom. But because it took a teenager finding a hidden camera to uncover the truth I'd been sleeping next to for 5 years. The media got wind of it 3 days after the raid. I wasn't prepared. A local news outlet ran a quiet headline at first, suburban man arrested in home surveillance case. No names. No photos. But by the next morning, someone leaked the footage list. The story exploded. Suddenly Tom's name was everywhere. My name. Our street. Our house. They called him the spy stepdad. Some reporter even showed up at my sister's door pretending to be from Child Protective Services. I didn't open it. But I filed a report. Tom's face was plastered across websites, social media, even a brief mention on the nightly news. They showed his mugshot, smirking, like he couldn't take it seriously. Like he still thought he'd get away with it. I couldn't go outside without someone looking at me too long. Whispering. Trying to be subtle and failing. Ellie's school counselor called. Said they'd heard about the arrest and wanted to know if she needed support. I said yes, and I pulled her out for the rest of the week. Meanwhile, Kyle and his mom cut off contact completely. I couldn't blame them. I texted him once, just to say I was proud of him. That he did the right thing. He didn't reply, but I saw the message was read. I started getting calls from Tom's family. Not the ones you'd expect. His sister wanted to talk privately, to know if I was sure this wasn't a mistake. His mother left a voicemail, begging me not to testify, because this would destroy the family. But what about my family? What about my daughter? What about me? They didn't care about that. They just wanted to make it go away. Then the detective called with one final update. Tom had confessed. Sort of. He admitted to setting up some devices. Claimed it was a compulsion. Said he didn't mean harm. That it was about control, not perversion. But he refused to say where else he'd installed cameras. Or who else might be in those files. He said he couldn't remember. And just like that, I realized. He still thought he was in control. But he wasn't. Not anymore. The arraignment happened quietly, no cameras allowed inside. I didn't attend. I couldn't stomach the thought of seeing his face again, calm, smug, like the courtroom was just another room he'd quietly wired without permission. But I read the transcript. The charges were extensive, multiple counts of unlawful surveillance, endangering the welfare of a minor, and possession of illicit recordings. The DA hinted at even more charges coming from other states. Women he'd filmed. Guests from years ago. A hotel chain pressing charges for devices found in 2 of their rooms. He didn't deny any of it. He just asked for bail. It was denied. That moment should have felt victorious. Like justice. But it didn't. It felt like standing in the wreckage of a life I didn't build, but still have to sweep up piece by piece. A week later, I finally stepped foot back into the house. Not alone, my sister came with me. The locks had already been changed. The police had cleared out every camera, every device, every piece of tech Tom had buried into the walls like cancer. But the house still felt hollow. Like every inch of it had been touched by something dark. I didn't pack much. Just what Ellie and I needed. The rest? I was going to sell. Burn, if I had to. Ellie's room was the last place I went. I stood there for a long time. She'd hung stars on the ceiling when she was little, glow-in-the-dark ones that only showed up when everything else was quiet. I hadn't noticed them in years. Now they were all I could see. I cried. Not because of what we lost, but because we got out. Because he didn't win. A few days ago, Kyle texted me. Just 3 words. Thank you. For believing me. I cried again. We're living in a new apartment now. Smaller, but warmer. Ellie's in therapy. So am I. Sometimes I wake up expecting to hear that robotic voice from the smart speakers Tom used to install in every corner. But it's quiet now. And that silence? It finally feels like peace. I've told my lawyer I want the fastest divorce possible. I don't want his name. I don't want his house. I don't want anything he touched. I just want my life back. He took so much without asking. But he didn't take us. And that's the only ending I care about.